Hello, my friends, and welcome to another Let's Talk Herbs. This is the fourth one we've had so far, and this one is about the prevention stage of illness and also the acute stage. I'm an herbalist with a deep appreciation for the plants that can assist us in staying well. This is a webcast about using herbs to assist us during this novel coronavirus pandemic and the disease called COVID-19. Please keep in mind that I'm not a doctor, and this talk does not constitute medical advice. What I want to share with you today are herbs that can help you manage your well-being during this challenging time. First, let's review the stages of disease. We've talked about the prevention stage, the acute stage, the recovery stage, and finally back to the prevention stage. Thus far, we've been talking about the prevention stage. I want to mention that again today because of the level of stress that we're experiencing at this time. Last time we talked about using valerian root in a tincture to assist with sleep. This is a tincture. Remember, you put the herb in and then pour vodka over the top and then label it. This particular one is hawthorn, and the hawthorn berries are in here. Hawthorn is very beneficial for the cardiovascular system, and because we have been hearing that the heart as well as the lungs are involved in some patients who contract COVID-19, using hawthorn, as I do once a day in the evening, is a preventative. It helps me to keep my blood pressure down. I don't take any blood pressure medication because I'm using hawthorn. And again, this is typically 2 drops, 1 drop that is, per every 50 pounds of body weight. So if you weigh 150, for example, it would be 3 droppers full. And I've shown you how to do that before. This is hawthorn. We talked about some foods that are beneficial before this, and we've talked about sauerkraut, we've talked about elderberry, and any fermented food is beneficial to ward off virus infection. For example, yogurt has beneficial bacteria that you probably already know about. It's a great thing to have in your diet. Also sauerkraut that we talked about before, how to make that. Miso is something out of Japanese cuisine. If you've ever gone to a Japanese restaurant, miso soup is delicious. You can make it yourself. You can get miso paste and then look up a recipe on the internet for that, and then make yourself some miso soup. It's delicious and also beneficial in warding off viruses. Tempeh is made from soy. It's fermented, and tempeh is something that can be used as a protein source. It can be cut in strips and stir-fried into your vegetables. It's very easy to use. It's a quick meal with stir-fried vegetables and some tempeh. Today, in addition, I want to mention chicken soup. You've heard about this for colds and so on, and actually it's been found to be beneficial, so make yourself some chicken soup. If you add ginger to it and garlic, these are 2 things that are very helpful for maintaining health when under the stress of the threat of a virus. In addition, I want to mention pine needles. Now, in New Jersey, we have lots of pine trees. There are so many different kinds. There are at least 100 different kinds of pine trees. And in particular, I tend to seek out the white pine needles. And especially in the spring, as we are in the spring now, if you just take off the last 4 inches or so of the growing tips and the needles, then what you can do is make a decoction of it. Remember, a decoction then is something that is made by putting the fresh herb or the dried herb into a pot covering it with water to the depth of at least 2 inches, and then simmering that for about 10 minutes, letting it cool, and then straining it out. This decoction is particularly helpful to open bronchial tubes. So if you're in the acute stage of infection, that chicken soup that I mentioned, and also a pine needles decoction is very helpful. Pine needles opens the bronchial tubes, so patients have talked about how difficult it is to breathe in the active stage of infection, and it feels very heavy in the chest, and that's for reasons which could be multiple, but in any case, pine needles help to open that up, so I recommend that. Mullein, M-U-L-L-E-I-N, is an herb that is very, very beneficial for lung membranes. I have a history of lung problems, so I do use mullein on a regular basis, and I'll tell you how I use it. It really helps to maintain the health of lung tissues. And then finally, I want to mention nettles. Now that is principally what we're going to be talking about today. Nettles is something that grows wild in New Jersey. If you know how to recognize it, it's not hard to find. It likes fertile areas, so on the perimeter of a garden that you might be maintaining. In my town, I noted that in a garden area at the fence line, there were wild nettles growing. Now, the thing about nettles is that it is difficult, somewhat difficult to harvest because there are tiny stinging hairs on the leaves and on the stems, which gives its name, stinging nettles. You want to avoid that. So if you decide to harvest some, which I have done, make sure that you have gloves and a long sleeve shirt to protect your skin. The toxin that's in those tiny hairs is the same that bees use. You know what it feels like if you've ever been stung by a bee. I have gotten that from nettles and it hurts. The stinging in fresh nettles is mediated. You can get rid of that by actually cooking the nettles. You can put it in a pot, put some water over it, just either boil that, simmer it, or steam for 5 to 10 minutes, and that toxin is gone. If you buy it dried, which I do, you can get quite a lot of it, a pound at a time, from a place that I have talked about before, and that's called Frontier Co-op. That is Frontier Co-op, COOP.com. And this is stinging leaf nettle. I take it out of their packaging and put it in the paper packaging because it's better for the herb to be able to have some air exchange. So I put it in here and I put the label on it so I know exactly what it is. I'm going to show you how to make what's called an infusion. This is how I use nettles usually. You can also cook with it. It tastes a lot like spinach, really. So you need certain things. You need a digital scale, and you need a 1-quart jar. A mason or a ball jar is what I use because you can pour boiling liquid into it and it won't break. You don't want it breaking with boiling liquid. So you take this and put the jar on top of it, take the lid off, and turn it on. And when you do that, the scale reads 0. It zeroes out the weight of the jar itself. And then take the herb and pour 1 ounce by weight. Not by, you can't say, oh, it's a cup or whatever. You will inevitably not get enough of it if you do it that way. You need to do it by weight. And once it's full with 1 ounce, which this is not, it'll come up to about this once it's full. And then you put boiling water, you put water on to boil. Once it's boiling, then you pour it to the top over the dried herb, and then you stir it. It's better to use a wooden skewer or something, or a spoon to stir it, because it won't react that way to wood as it might to metal. Then you stir it up, and then it will settle down a little bit. Then pour more boiling water so that it comes almost to the very top. Then you take the 2-part lid and close it up. Now, you're going to leave this on the counter overnight, or for at least 4 hours. 8 hours is better. I leave it out overnight. And then in the morning, you take it out and get a bowl or a container and a strainer. You pour it out so that you have the liquid separated from the herb. Then pour it back into this container so it's just liquid. Put that in the refrigerator. You want to drink all of it, the whole quart, in a 24-hour period. And it really tastes good, but you can add something to it if you want, a little sweetening, or I don't do that. I just drink it as is. As I said, it tastes a little like spinach. Now, don't be surprised, because when it's finished, it's green. And you have to get used to the idea that you'll be drinking a green fluid. But what nettles does is pretty amazing. First of all, the plant, through its root system, uptakes a lot of trace minerals that is hard to get in the way plants are grown these days in factory farms and all of that kind of stuff. It goes down deep in the soil and it gets those minerals, which are very helpful for your overall health. But it's specifically, nettles tends to counter something that we've been hearing about when you read about the corona virus, COVID-19 disease, and that is that the body, when faced with this novel virus, mounts a defense. Your immune system mounts a defense. And it's called cytokines that are implicated in this process. And the body just goes haywire, and it starts to attack its own healthy tissue in addition to the virus itself. And that's called a cytokine storm. Well, nettles has the benefit of countering that cytokine storm, which certainly is what we want to be doing if you find that you have been diagnosed with COVID-19. Very important. So we have mentioned certain foods today. We've mentioned elderberry syrup before. We've talked about valerian root before to help with sleep. We've talked about lemon balm to make a tisane, which is an herbal tea or a decoction with. We've talked about the benefits of yogurt and sauerkraut. I gave you a recipe for sauerkraut. You can look up a recipe or buy miso soup. Use tempeh in your cooking. And then in the acute stage, chicken soup, especially if you add ginger and garlic to it. The pine needles decoction for the acute stage that opens the bronchial tubes. Mullein, wonderful for the health of the lungs. And I use that because I have some lung issues. Nettles, very beneficial. Something I didn't mention about nettles is that I find that it provides me with energy that caffeine does not in the same way. Caffeine gives you a boost and then it drops off. So it goes up and then your energy drops off and you feel like you need more coffee. Nettles does not do that. I find when I use nettles, it gives me a day-long sustained level of energy that is very beneficial, and no ups and downs like that. Just all day stable energy, which I really benefit from. I mentioned one source today that is Frontier, F-R-O-N-T-I-E-R Co-op, COOP.com, which is where I buy my nettles from. So for today, my friends, that's the end of this herbal talk, and I will see you next time.